My father-in-law asked me to massage his back. I thought it was innocent. He'd been complaining about pain for weeks. But when he turned over, I saw something that made my blood run cold. My entire marriage was built on lies, and he knew it all along. My name is Rachel Bennett, and I'm a physical therapist. I married into what I thought was the perfect family. I was so wrong. The request. Sunday dinners at the Bennett house were supposed to be sacred. Every week, like clockwork, my husband Mark and I would drive across town to his parents' beautiful colonial home with the white picket fence and perfectly trimmed hedges. His mother, Patricia, always had a roast in the oven and homemade apple pie cooling on the counter. It was picture perfect, the kind of family I'd always dreamed of joining. I never had that growing up. My own parents split when I was 12, and holidays became a negotiation between two people who couldn't stand to be in the same room. So when Mark introduced me to his family 3 years ago, I fell in love with them almost as much as I fell in love with him. Dennis, my father-in-law, was charming and successful. He owned a manufacturing company that employed over 200 people. Patricia was warm and welcoming, always asking about my work at the therapy clinic. That particular Sunday in October started like all the others. I walked through the front door carrying a bottle of wine, the smell of rosemary and garlic filling my nose. Patricia hugged me tight, and Mark immediately disappeared into the living room with his dad to watch football. I helped set the table, laughing at Patricia's stories about her book club drama. But during dinner, I noticed Dennis wincing every time he reached for something. He kept rolling his shoulder and grimacing. Finally, Patricia called him out on it. "Dennis, you need to see a doctor about that shoulder," she said, cutting into her roast beef. "It's nothing," he muttered, but I could see the pain in his eyes. Mark looked at me across the table. "Honey, you could take a look at it, couldn't you? You're the expert." I hesitated for just a moment. Something about the way Dennis looked at me made my skin prickle, but I couldn't explain why. I'd given family members massages before. It was part of being a physical therapist. Everyone always wanted free advice. "Sure," I said, smiling. "After dinner, I can do a quick assessment." Dennis smiled back at me, and I noticed it didn't quite reach his eyes. "That would be wonderful. Rachel, I've been suffering for days. You're a lifesaver." The rest of dinner felt normal enough. We talked about Mark's work at the accounting firm, Patricia's upcoming trip to visit her sister, and my latest patient success story. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Dennis kept watching me with an expression I couldn't read. When we finished dessert, Dennis stood up and stretched carefully. "Rachel, why don't we head to my study? I've got everything set up there." "Set up?" I asked, confused. "I bought a massage table last week," he explained. "Been meaning to use it. Figured it might help with the pain." Mark squeezed my hand. "Thanks for doing this, babe. Dad's been really hurting." I followed Dennis down the hallway toward his study, my heart beating faster than it should have been. It was just a massage. Just a simple professional assessment. So why did I feel like I was walking into a trap? The massage room. Dennis's study had always been off limits to everyone except him. Even Mark rarely went in there. It was his private sanctuary, filled with awards from his business, expensive leather furniture, and dark wood paneling that made the room feel like a cave. As he opened the door, I noticed something new, a shiny brass lock on the inside of the door frame. "When did you get that installed?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Last month," Dennis said, closing the door behind us but not locking it. "I keep important documents in here. Can't be too careful these days." The massage table sat in the center of the room, professional grade with a face cradle and everything. It looked expensive, like something you'd find in an actual clinic. Dennis had clearly put thought into the setup, which struck me as odd. Why would someone buy such an expensive table for a single sore shoulder? "This is quite the investment," I said, running my hand along the padded surface. Dennis started unbuttoning his dress shirt. "I figured if I'm going to take care of my health, I should do it right. Patricia's been nagging me about my posture for years." I turned away while he changed, giving him privacy. When I turned back around, he was lying face down on the table in his undershirt and dress pants. The white fabric of his shirt was stretched across his back, and I could see the tension in his shoulders even from where I stood. "Okay," I said, falling into my professional mode. "Tell me where the pain is concentrated." "Right shoulder blade," he said, his voice muffled by the face cradle. "Sometimes it shoots down my arm." I washed my hands at the small sink in the corner of the room and dried them carefully. Then I approached the table and placed my hands on his shoulders, feeling for areas of tension and inflammation. His muscles were tight, knotted in several places. It was the kind of stress tension I saw in my patients who worked desk jobs and never stretched. You're carrying a lot of stress here, I told him, working my thumbs into the muscle. When's the last time you took a vacation? Too long, he admitted. The company keeps me busy. I worked in silence for several minutes, using the techniques I'd learned in physical therapy school. Deep tissue massage, trigger point therapy, gentle stretching. Dennis groaned occasionally, which I took as a sign that I was hitting the right spots. But something felt wrong. The air in the room felt thick, heavy. I couldn't shake the sensation that I was being watched, even though Dennis's face was pointed at the floor. My hands were shaking slightly, and I didn't understand why. I'd done this 1,000 times with patients. I was a professional, but this didn't feel professional. It felt like something else entirely, something dark lurking just beneath the surface. How's that feel? I asked, my voice coming out smaller than I intended. Better, Dennis said. You're very good at this, Rachel. I can see why you're so successful. The compliment should have made me feel good, but instead it made my stomach twist. There was something in his tone, something that suggested he wasn't just talking about massage therapy. I work hard, I said simply, continuing to knead the muscles along his spine. I know you do, Dennis replied. I know a lot about your hard work, more than you might think. Before I could ask what he meant by that, everything changed. Dennis suddenly flipped over onto his back without any warning. I jumped backwards, startled by the sudden movement. My heart was racing now, pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Mr. Bennett, I was working on your back. Call me Dennis, he interrupted, propping himself up on his elbows. He wasn't looking at me. His eyes were fixed on his phone, which he'd pulled from his pocket. And I think we need to have a different kind of conversation now. As the turn, my first instinct was to leave. Everything about the situation screamed danger, but my feet felt frozen to the floor. Dennis held his phone up so I could see the screen, and that's when my entire world tilted sideways. The photo showed me with a man I'd spent 5 years trying to forget. Jake Morrison. We were standing outside a rundown apartment building, his arm around my shoulders, both of us smiling at the camera. I was younger in the photo, maybe 23, with longer hair and a naive expression that made me want to cry. Where did you get that? I whispered, my voice barely audible. Dennis smiled, and it was the coldest smile I'd ever seen. I have my sources. Technology is amazing these days, isn't it? Nothing ever really disappears from the internet, no matter how hard you try to delete it. Jake Morrison had been my boyfriend for 2 years in my early 20s. He was charming, funny, and completely wrong for me. I was in physical therapy school, working 2 jobs to pay my tuition, dreaming of a stable future. Jake was always chasing get-rich-quick schemes, borrowing money he never paid back, and making promises he couldn't keep. Then he got arrested for armed robbery. He and 2 friends had held up a convenience store, and Jake was identified as the getaway driver. The evidence against him was overwhelming. Security footage, witness testimony, the stolen money found in his apartment. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison. I broke up with him the day after his sentencing. I never visited him. I never wrote. I deleted every photo, every message, every trace of him from my life. When I met Mark 2 years later, I didn't mention Jake. It was a part of my past I wanted to forget, a mistake I'd made when I was young and stupid. I dated him before he went to prison, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. It was a long time ago. Mark knows I had relationships before him. Does he? Dennis asked, swiping to another photo. Does he know about this one? The next image made my blood run cold. It showed Jake and me outside what looked like a pawn shop. I was holding a bag, and Jake had his hand on my back, guiding me toward the entrance. The timestamp showed it was taken 3 weeks before the robbery. I wasn't involved in his crimes, I said firmly. I had no idea what he was doing. Maybe, Dennis said, his voice casual and unconcerned. But would the police believe that? Would Mark believe it? Look at this photo, Rachel. You're carrying something into a pawn shop with a known criminal. What do you think people would assume? I felt sick. I remembered that day vaguely. Jake had asked me to help him sell some old electronics. He said he needed cash for rent. I thought I was being a supportive girlfriend, helping him through a tough time. I had no idea he was planning a robbery or that the electronics were probably stolen. You can't do this, I said, but there was no strength in my voice. Dennis sat up fully now, swinging his legs over the side of the massage table. He was still smiling that horrible smile. I've known about your past since before the wedding, Rachel. Did you really think I'd let my son marry someone without doing a background check? I know everything. Your ex-boyfriend in prison, Your financial struggles during physical therapy school. Every single mistake you ever made. Then why? I asked, tears starting to form in my eyes. Why let Mark marry me if you knew? Because you became useful, Dennis said simply. 3 years ago, you were just a girl with a questionable past. But then you got that job at Premier Physical Therapy, and suddenly you had access to very important people, very influential people, people I needed to know about. The pieces started clicking together in my mind, but I didn't want to believe it. You wanted Mark to marry me? I encouraged it, Dennis corrected. Mark was smitten with you from the first date. All I had to do was be supportive, tell him you seemed like a wonderful girl, welcome you into the family with open arms. And you made it so easy, Rachel. You were so desperate for a family, so eager to belong. You never questioned anything. I felt like I was going to vomit. My entire relationship with Mark, our courtship, our marriage, had it all been orchestrated by his father? Did Mark know? Was he part of this? Mark doesn't know, Dennis said, as if reading my mind. My son is a good boy, but he's naive. He believes in love and happy endings. He has no idea why I really wanted him to marry you. What do you want from me? I asked, the question coming out as barely more than a whisper. Dennis's smile widened. Now we're getting to the interesting part. In the confession trap, Dennis stood up from the massage table and walked to his desk, leaving his phone on the table where I could still see the incriminating photos. He opened a drawer and pulled out a manila folder that looked thick with documents. My hands were trembling as I watched him, my mind racing through every possible scenario. None of them ended well. 5 years ago, Dennis began, settling into his leather desk chair, Jake Morrison witnessed something he shouldn't have. He was working as a delivery driver for a company that supplied parts to my manufacturing plant. One afternoon, he made a delivery to my office and overheard a conversation I was having with a building inspector, a conversation involving a very generous cash payment in exchange for overlooking certain safety violations. I stared at him, unable to process what he was saying. You bribed an inspector? I did what was necessary to keep my business running, Dennis said coldly. Those safety upgrades would have cost me millions. The inspector was happy to be reasonable for $50,000. Everyone won. Except Jake Morrison saw the money change hands. He saw everything. So you framed him, I said, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. The robbery, you set him up. Dennis shrugged. Jake was already a small-time criminal. It wasn't difficult to plant evidence, to make sure he was in the wrong place at the right time. My associates made sure the police had everything they needed to put him away for a long time, and it worked beautifully until you showed up 3 years ago at Premier Physical Therapy. He opened the folder and spread several photographs across his desk. I could see they were surveillance photos of the clinic where I worked, photos of patients entering and leaving, photos of me at the front desk, talking to colleagues, walking to my car. You see, Rachel, one of your patients is a man named David Chen. Does that name sound familiar? It did. David Chen was a lawyer who came to me for treatment of chronic back pain from a car accident. He was professional, polite, and always on time for his appointments. He's my patient, I said carefully. What does he have to do with anything? David Chen is the lead attorney in a class action lawsuit against my company, Dennis explained. 12 of my former employees are claiming they developed respiratory illnesses from exposure to chemicals in my plant. They're suing for millions in damages, and David Chen is building a case based on their medical records and current health conditions. The implications hit me immediately. You want me to access his medical files? Very good, Dennis said, actually clapping his hands together like I was a performing dog. I need to know the extent of his injuries, what his prognosis is, how long he'll be able to work on this case. His medical records will tell me if he's really as healthy as he pretends to be, or if his back pain is severe enough to potentially sideline him. That information is worth everything to me. That's illegal, I said, my voice shaking with anger now instead of fear. I would lose my license. I could go to jail. You could, Dennis agreed. But you won't, because you're going to do exactly what I tell you. Because if you don't, I'll make sure every police detective in this city sees these photos of you with Jake Morrison. I'll tell them you knew about the robbery, that you were his accomplice, that you helped him plan the whole thing. I have friends in the police department, Rachel. Very good friends. They'll believe me. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to run out of the room, but I was trapped. If I refused, Dennis would destroy my reputation and possibly send me to prison. If I agreed, I would be violating everything I believed in as a healthcare professional, betraying a patient's trust, and committing a serious crime. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, tears streaming down my face now. "Why ruin so many lives just to protect your money?" "Because I can," Dennis said simply. "Because I built that company from nothing, and I won't let some greedy former employees take it away from me. Because I have the power, and power's meant to be used. You have until Friday to get me those medical records. If you don't, I start making phone calls. Do we understand each other?" I couldn't speak. I could barely breathe. All I could do was nod slowly, hating myself for the weakness but seeing no other choice. Dennis smiled that horrible smile again. "Good girl. Now go back to dinner and pretend everything is normal. Patricia made that apple pie special for you." The blackmail begins. I somehow made it back to the dining room without collapsing. My legs felt like jelly, and my hands wouldn't stop shaking. Patricia was clearing dishes, humming to herself, completely oblivious to the fact that her husband had just destroyed my entire life in his private study. "How's Dennis's shoulder?" she asked cheerfully, loading plates into the dishwasher. "Better," I managed to say. "The massage should help." Mark came in from the living room, wrapping his arms around me from behind and kissing my cheek. "My hero," he said warmly. "Dad said you worked magic on those knots." I forced myself to smile, to lean back against my husband's chest, to pretend that everything was fine, but inside I was screaming. How could I tell Mark what his father had just done? How could I explain that our entire marriage might have been manipulated, that I had a criminal past I'd never mentioned, that his father was blackmailing me to commit federal crimes? "I'm going to use the restroom," I said, pulling away from Mark's embrace. "Be right back." I locked myself in the bathroom and stared at my reflection in the mirror. My face was pale, my eyes red from holding back tears. I splashed cold water on my cheeks and tried to think clearly. There had to be a way out of this. There had to be some option I wasn't seeing. But every path I considered led to disaster. If I told Mark, he might not believe me. His father was a respected businessman, and I was the one with the secret criminal connection. If I went to the police, Dennis would make good on his threats and show them the doctored evidence. If I refused to get the medical files, Dennis would destroy my career and my marriage. A soft knock on the door made me jump. "Rachel, you okay in there?" It was Mark's voice, concerned and gentle. "Fine," I called back. "Just feeling a little off. Must have eaten too fast." "Want to head home? Mom won't mind." Yes, I wanted to go home and crawl into bed and pretend this nightmare wasn't happening. "That would be good." We said our goodbyes, and Patricia sent us home with leftover pie. Dennis walked us to the door, playing the role of concerned father-in-law perfectly. "Take care of yourself, Rachel," he said, shaking my hand. His grip was firm, almost threatening. "Remember what we talked about." The drive home was torture. Mark kept asking if I was okay, suggesting I might be coming down with something. I told him I was just tired from work, that I'd been seeing too many patients lately. He believed every word because Mark always believed me. He trusted me completely, and that trust felt like a knife in my chest. That night, I lay awake while Mark slept peacefully beside me. I stared at the ceiling, trying to figure out what to do. Dennis had given me until Friday, 3 days away. 3 days to decide whether to commit a crime or watch my life fall apart. Around 3 in the morning, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from an unknown number, but I knew immediately who it was from. The message contained another photo of Jake and me, this one showing us outside a bank. I didn't remember this day, but the timestamp showed it was just days before the robbery. Below the photo was a simple message. "Don't forget, Friday, 5 p.m. Bring copies of David Chen's complete medical file. Or would you prefer I send this to your husband first?" I deleted the message with shaking hands. But I knew it didn't matter. Dennis had me exactly where he wanted me, and there was nothing I could do about it. Or was there, the impossible position I called in sick to work on Monday, claiming food poisoning? The truth was, I couldn't face the clinic, couldn't look at David Chen's file folder sitting innocently in the cabinet, knowing what Dennis wanted me to do with it. Instead, I drove around the city aimlessly, trying to think of any possible solution. By noon, I found myself parked outside a coffee shop downtown, watching people come and go with their morning lattes and breakfast sandwiches. They all looked so normal, so untroubled. Nobody else was being blackmailed by their father-in-law. Nobody else was trapped between destroying their career and destroying their marriage. I pulled out my phone and almost called the police. My finger hovered over the emergency number, but I couldn't make myself press it. What would I say? That my father-in-law had photos of me with my ex-boyfriend? That he claimed to have framed someone for armed robbery 5 years ago? Without proof, it would be my word against his. And Dennis Bennett was a respected businessman with connections throughout the city. I was just a physical therapist with a questionable past. The photos he had weren't technically fabricated. They were real images of me with Jake Morrison. Without context, they looked damning. A jury might believe I was involved in Jake's crimes. Even if I was eventually cleared, the accusation alone would destroy my reputation and my license to practice therapy. I couldn't go to the police. I couldn't tell Mark. The photos Dennis had would plant doubt in my husband's mind, make him question everything about our relationship. Even if Mark believed my innocence, he'd have to choose between his wife and his father, and I wasn't sure which side he'd take. That left only one option: steal David Chen's medical records and hand them over to Dennis, become a criminal to avoid being framed as a criminal. The irony was suffocating. I drove home around 3 o'clock, hoping to have a few hours alone before Mark got back from work. But when I pulled into our driveway, his car was already there. My heart sank. He must have come home early, probably worried about me after I called in sick. Inside, Mark was sitting at the kitchen table with his laptop. He looked up when I walked in, concern written all over his face. "Hey, how are you feeling? I brought home soup from that place you like." The kindness in his voice made me want to cry. "That's sweet," I said, setting my purse down. "I'm feeling a little better." "You sure? You look pale. Maybe you should see a doctor." "I'm fine," I insisted, maybe too firmly. "Just needed some rest." Mark stood up and pulled me into a hug. I buried my face in his chest, breathing in the familiar scent of his cologne. This was the man I loved, the man I'd married, the man whose father was using our relationship as a weapon against me. How had everything gotten so twisted? "My dad called earlier," Mark said, and I felt my entire body tense. "He wanted to check on you. Said you seemed really uncomfortable after the massage yesterday. He feels terrible about it." I pulled back and forced myself to smile. It's not his fault. I wasn't feeling great even before we got there. "He also mentioned something weird," Mark continued, studying my face. "He said he wanted to take us out to dinner Friday night. Just the three of us. Dad said Mom has her book club. But he was really insistent about Friday specifically. Do you know what that's about?" Friday at 5 o'clock, the deadline. Dennis was tightening the screws, making sure I understood the consequences of failing to deliver. "No idea," I lied. "Maybe he just wants to spend time with us." Mark shrugged. "I guess. It just seemed odd how specific he was about the day and time, but hey, free dinner, right?" I managed a weak laugh and changed the subject. That night, I made Mark his favorite meal and pretended everything was normal. We watched TV together, talked about our days, and went to bed early. Mark fell asleep quickly, but I lay awake for hours, staring at the darkness and hating Dennis Bennett with every fiber of my being. Tuesday and Wednesday passed in a blur. I went back to work, going through the motions of treating patients while my mind raced with scenarios and plans. Each time I passed David Chen's file, I felt sick. He trusted me with his medical information. He'd shared intimate details about his pain, his struggles, his fears about his health, and I was considering betraying that trust to save myself. On Thursday morning, I stood in front of the filing cabinet for 10 minutes, my hand on the drawer pull, telling myself to just do it. Open the drawer, make copies. Hand them to Dennis. End this nightmare. But I couldn't make my hand move. Something inside me refused to become the person Dennis was trying to force me to be. That's when I realized I needed help. Not from the police, not from Mark, but from someone who understood what Dennis was capable of. Someone who had already been victimized by him. I needed to find Jake Morrison's sister. The secret investigation. I'd only met Maria Morrison once, at a party Jake had dragged me to years ago. She'd been kind to me, protective of her little brother despite his flaws. After Jake went to prison, I'd thought about reaching out to her, but I was too ashamed, too eager to distance myself from that entire chapter of my life. Now I needed her. It took me 2 hours of internet searching to find her. She'd gotten married and changed her name, moved to a different part of the city. Maria Torres now, working as a paralegal at a small law firm. I found her email address through LinkedIn and sent her a message that afternoon, asking if we could meet. I didn't explain why, just said it was important and related to Jake. She responded within an hour. "Coffee tomorrow? 8 a.m. before work? Starbucks on Highland Ave." Tomorrow was Friday, Dennis's deadline. I'd have to call in sick again, but I was out of options. I typed back, "I'll be there." That night, Mark asked again about dinner with his dad. Should I confirm with him? He's been texting me all day about it. Actually, I said carefully, I'm still not feeling great. Could we postpone? Mark frowned. Dad seemed really insistent. He said he has something important to discuss with us. I bet he does, I thought bitterly. Okay, Bussy, we can go, but just for a little while. I barely slept that night, running through what I was going to say to Maria, how I would convince her to help me, whether she would even believe my story. At 7:30 Friday morning, I told Mark I had an early patient and left the house. Maria was already at the coffee shop when I arrived. She'd changed, older, more professional, her hair shorter and her expression harder than I remembered. She didn't smile when she saw me, just gestured to the chair across from her. I almost didn't come, she said bluntly. You disappeared after Jake was convicted. Never wrote to him, never checked on our family. Why should I talk to you now? I deserve that. Because I think I know who really framed your brother, I said quietly. And he's trying to do the same thing to me. That got her attention. Maria leaned forward, her eyes sharp. Explain. I told her everything. Dennis Bennett's confession, the blackmail, the photos, the demand for medical records. I explained how Dennis had manipulated Mark into marrying me, how he'd orchestrated everything for 3 years just to get access to one patient's medical information. Maria listened without interrupting, her expression growing darker with every word. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, Jake always claimed someone set him up. He said the robbery was supposed to be fake, that someone paid him to be the getaway driver for what he thought was a staged insurance fraud. He swore he didn't know it was a real robbery until the arrests happened. Do you believe him? I asked. I didn't, Maria admitted. Jake had a history of bad decisions and worse friends, but he maintained his innocence for 5 years, even when it could have gotten him a reduced sentence to confess. That didn't make sense unless he was telling the truth. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through old messages. After Jake was convicted, I tried to investigate on my own. I found witnesses who saw him with 2 men he'd never mentioned before, men who disappeared right after the robbery. I tracked them to a security company that did contract work. Guess who owned that security company? Dennis Bennett, I breathed. One of his subsidiary companies, Maria confirmed, but I couldn't prove anything. The men had alibis, the company had clean records, and I was just a grieving sister who couldn't accept her brother's guilt. Nobody would listen to me. Dennis said Jake witnessed a bribery, I told her. Between Dennis and a building inspector. That's why he framed him. Maria's hands clenched into fists. That bastard stole 6 years of my brother's life, and now he's trying to force you to commit crimes for him too. We have to stop him. How? I asked desperately. He has all the power. He has photos, connections, money. I have nothing. You have something Dennis doesn't think you have, Maria said, a fierce smile crossing her face. You have me, and I've spent 6 years learning everything I can about legal evidence and investigation. I work for lawyers now, Rachel. I know how to build a case. For the first time since Sunday, I felt a flicker of hope. What do we do? First, you pretend to cooperate, Maria said. Go to that dinner tonight with Dennis and Mark. Let Dennis think he's won, but record everything. I'll help you set up a hidden camera or audio device. If we can get Dennis to confess on tape, we'll have leverage. And then what? Then we take everything to the police and the state medical board. We expose Dennis's bribery, his blackmail scheme, his fraud. We get Jake's case reopened, and we make sure Dennis Bennett never hurts anyone again. It was risky. It could backfire spectacularly, but it was the only real chance I had. Okay, I said. Let's do it. The Alliance Maria took me to her law office, where she had access to equipment the firm used for investigations and depositions. We spent 2 hours setting up a recording device, a tiny digital recorder that clipped to the inside of my blouse, invisible but powerful enough to capture clear audio from several feet away. This is crucial, Maria explained as she tested the equipment. Make sure Dennis is specific. Get him to mention the bribery, the frame-up, Jake's name if possible. The more details he gives, the stronger our case. What if he doesn't say anything incriminating? I asked nervously. Then we try again, Maria said firmly. But men like Dennis Bennett are arrogant. They love to brag about how clever they are. Give him the chance to gloat, and he'll probably take it. We synced the recorder to an app on Maria's phone so she could monitor the conversation remotely. If anything went wrong, she'd be able to hear it in real time. It wasn't much of a safety net, but it was something. Before I left, Maria grabbed my hand. Rachel, I need you to understand something. If we do this, there's no going back. You're going to expose your father-in-law as a criminal. Your husband might hate you for it. Your marriage might not survive. I'd already thought about that. All night, every night this week, I'd thought about it. If I don't do this, my marriage won't survive anyway, I said quietly. Dennis will always have power over me. He'll keep using me, keep making demands. This is the only way to be free. Then let's make sure we get this bastard, Maria said. I drove to work for the afternoon, keeping up appearances and treating patients while the recorder stayed safely in my purse. At 4:30, I changed into the dress I'd brought, something nice enough for dinner, but with enough structure to hide the recording device. I clipped it in place, tested it twice, and then drove to the restaurant where Dennis had made reservations. Mark was already there, waiting in the parking lot. He kissed me when I got out of the car. You look beautiful, he said, taking my hand. Dad said he has a surprise for us tonight. He seemed really excited about it. I bet he was excited. He thought I'd be handing over stolen medical records, proving I was willing to be his puppet forever. We walked into the restaurant together, and Dennis was already seated at a corner table. He stood when he saw us, all smiles and warm embraces, playing the role of the perfect father. Rachel, Mark, so glad you could make it. The recorder was running. I could feel it against my skin, a small piece of plastic and wire that represented my only chance at freedom. Thanks for inviting us, I said, forcing myself to sound normal. This place is beautiful. Only the best for family, Dennis said smoothly. He ordered wine for the table. Expensive bottles, I knew, cost hundreds of dollars. Everything about Dennis was designed to show his wealth, his power, his control. We made small talk through appetizers and salads. Mark told his dad about a new client at the accounting firm. Dennis complained about labor costs at his company. I pushed food around my plate and waited for the moment when Dennis would reveal his true purpose. It came during the main course. Mark excused himself to take a phone call from a colleague, leaving Dennis and me alone at the table. Dennis leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. Did you bring them? He asked. I nodded slowly, patting my purse. Flash drive, complete medical file for David Chen. Dennis's eyes lit up with triumph. Good girl. I knew you'd make the right choice. This is it, though, I said, keeping my voice steady. After this, we're done. No more demands. Dennis laughed, actually laughed. Oh, Rachel, you're adorable. Did you really think this was a one-time thing? I own you now. Whenever I need information from your clinic, you'll provide it. Whenever I need someone with medical access, you'll be there. That's how this works. Why? I asked, letting real emotion into my voice. Why are you doing this to me, to your own son's wife? Because I can, Dennis said, echoing what he'd told me in his study. Because 5 years ago, a punk kid with a delivery truck saw something he shouldn't have, and I had to eliminate the threat. Jake Morrison was nobody, just another criminal who ended up where he belonged. But you, Rachel, you're useful. You have access to people I need leverage against. Starting with David Chen and his ridiculous lawsuit. You really framed Jake Morrison? I whispered, making sure the recorder caught every word. Dennis glanced around to make sure no one was listening. I paid 2 men from one of my security contractors to stage the robbery. Jake thought he was helping with an insurance scam. Easy money for a desperate kid. He had no idea it was real until the police arrested him. The evidence was so perfect, he never stood a chance. And that building inspector who could have testified about the bribery? He retired to Florida with a very generous pension. Everyone won except Jake Morrison. My hands were shaking, but this time with rage instead of fear. You destroyed his life. I protected my business, Dennis corrected coldly. Those safety violations he witnessed, they would have cost me millions to fix. The inspector understood that regulations are flexible for the right price. Jake should have minded his own business. And the lawsuit now, I pressed, needing him to connect all the pieces. David Chen's lawsuit? 12 employees claiming respiratory illness from chemical exposure, Dennis said dismissively. It's nonsense, but Chen is building a case based on their medical records and current health. If I know Chen's own medical situation, how long he can physically work on this case, whether his back pain might force him to step down, I can plan accordingly. Maybe settle before it goes to trial, or wait him out if he's too sick to continue. Your patient files give me the advantage I need. And if I refuse to get you more files after this? Dennis's expression turned ice cold. Then I show your husband the photos. I tell the police about your involvement in Jake's robbery. I make sure every hospital and clinic in this state knows you violated patient confidentiality. Your career, your marriage, your reputation, all gone. You really want to take that risk? Before I could answer, Mark returned to the table. Sorry about that, he said, sliding back into his seat. What did I miss? Just discussing business, Dennis said smoothly, his mask sliding back into place. Rachel was telling me about her work at the clinic. Such interesting patients she treats. I excused myself to the bathroom, needing a moment alone. In the stall, I sent Maria a quick text. Got it. Everything recorded. Her response came immediately. Perfect. Get out of there safely. Meet me at the office tomorrow morning. We'll take everything to the police. I steadied my breathing and returned to the table. We finished dinner with Dennis playing the charming patriarch, making jokes and asking Mark about his plans for the holidays. I played along, smiling and nodding, all while the recording device captured every word. When dinner finally ended, Dennis walked us to our car. Rachel, he said quietly while Mark was unlocking the doors. I'll expect the flash drive in my office tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock sharp. I'll be there, I lied. He patted my shoulder, and it took everything in me not to recoil from his touch. That's my girl. Welcome to the family business. The trap springs back. That night, I told Mark I wasn't feeling well again and went to bed early. He was concerned, offering to stay home from work in the morning, but I insisted I just needed rest. Once he fell asleep, I lay awake, planning my next move. Saturday morning, I told Mark I was going to a yoga class, something I did occasionally, so it wouldn't raise suspicion. Instead, I drove to Maria's law office. She was waiting with a laptop and the audio file from last night's dinner. I've listened to it 3 times, Maria said, her eyes blazing with determination. It's perfect. Dennis confesses to framing Jake, bribing an official, and blackmailing you into stealing medical records. This is enough to reopen Jake's case and press criminal charges against Dennis. What's our next step? I asked. We take this to the district attorney's office, Maria explained. I have a contact there, a prosecutor who specializes in corruption cases. She'll know how to handle this. But Rachel, you need to be prepared. This is going to get ugly. Dennis will fight back with everything he has. I know, I said. But I can't live like this. And your brother deserves justice. We spent the next hour preparing our case. Maria had compiled evidence from Jake's original trial, witness statements that were never properly investigated, financial records showing connections between Dennis's company and the security contractors who'd staged the robbery. Combined with the audio recording, it was damning. But I wanted more. I wanted Dennis to confess everything, not just in a whispered conversation at a restaurant, but clearly and undeniably, and I had an idea of how to make that happen. What if I went to his office like he asked? I suggested. What if I wore the recording device again and got him to repeat everything? We could set up a video camera too, hidden in my purse. Maria looked skeptical. That's risky. Dennis might get suspicious. Or he might be too confident to notice, I countered. Men like him don't think they can be caught. Let him gloat one more time, let him explain his whole operation, and we'll have everything we need. After some debate, Maria agreed. We set up a small camera inside a modified purse, the lens hidden in what looked like a decorative button. Combined with the audio recorder, we'd capture everything Dennis said, and did. At 8:30 Monday morning, I drove to Dennis's company headquarters. My heart was pounding, but I forced myself to stay calm. This was it, the moment that would either free me or destroy everything. Dennis's secretary waved me through to his private office. He was sitting behind his massive desk, looking pleased with himself. Right on time, he said. I like punctuality. Did you bring the files? Yes, I said, reaching into my purse as if to retrieve a flash drive. But I need to understand something first. How long is this going to continue? How many times will you ask me to steal information? Dennis leaned back in his chair, completely relaxed. As long as you're useful to me, Rachel. I have enemies, competitors, legal troubles. Having someone with medical access to key people is incredibly valuable. For instance, there's a judge hearing a case against my company next month. I happen to know he's also a patient at your clinic. I'll need his medical records by... Mr. Bennett, the secretary's voice came through the intercom. Your son is here to see you. He says it's urgent. Both Dennis and I froze. Mark? Why was Mark here? Before either of us could respond, the office door burst open. Mark stood there, his face pale and his hands shaking. Behind him was Maria, and behind her were two police detectives in suits. Dad? Mark's voice cracked. Tell me Rachel is lying. Tell me she's making this up. My heart stopped. How did Mark know? How did he? Maria stepped forward, holding up her phone. I've been monitoring the recording in real time, she explained, looking at me. When Dennis started talking, I knew we had enough. I called the police and your husband. I'm sorry, Rachel, but I thought he deserved to hear the truth from someone other than the cops. Mark was staring at his father with an expression of complete devastation. Is it true? Did you really frame someone for armed robbery? Did you blackmail my wife? Dennis's face had gone from confident to furious in seconds. He stood up, pointing at me. This is entrapment. She recorded me illegally. You can't. Actually, one of the detectives said, stepping forward with handcuffs. Single-party consent recording is legal in this state, and we've heard enough to arrest you for blackmail, extortion, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Dennis Bennett, you're under arrest. Everything happened fast after that. Dennis shouted threats and accusations as the detectives cuffed him and read his rights. His secretary was crying in the hallway. Other employees gathered, watching in shock as their boss was led away in handcuffs. Mark turned to me, tears streaming down his face. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you trust me with this? I was scared, I admitted, my own tears falling now. Your father had evidence that made me look guilty. He said you'd never believe me. He said he'd destroy everything if I didn't cooperate. Do you really think I'd choose him over you? Mark asked, his voice breaking. Rachel, you're my wife. I love you. I would have believed you. I would have helped you. Maria cleared her throat gently. There's more you both need to know, she said. Dennis didn't just randomly want Mark to marry Rachel. He orchestrated their entire relationship because Rachel worked at the clinic with patients he wanted information about. He admitted this on the recording. Mark's face went even paler. Our whole relationship, it was his idea? He encouraged it, I said quickly. But Mark, everything between us, our dates, falling in love, getting married, that was real. Your father manipulated the circumstances, but he didn't create our feelings. I love you. That part was never fake. Mark sank into a chair, his head in his hands. I wanted to go to him, to comfort him, but I didn't know if he'd want me to touch him. His entire world had just shattered. His father was a criminal. His marriage had been manipulated. Nothing was what he thought it was. I need time, Mark said finally, not looking at me. I need to process this. I need to understand what's real and what isn't. Those words hurt more than anything Dennis had done to me, but I understood. I nodded, even though Mark wasn't looking, and walked out of the office with Maria, the reckoning. The next 3 weeks were the hardest of my life. Mark moved into a hotel, saying he needed space to think. Dennis was denied bail due to flight risk and sat in jail awaiting trial. The story hit the news. Local businessman arrested for blackmail and conspiracy. Dennis's company stock plummeted. Patricia filed for divorce. Maria and I worked closely with the district attorney's office. The evidence was overwhelming. Dennis had been bribing officials for years, manipulating legal cases, and using his wealth to destroy anyone who threatened his business. The building inspector who'd taken the original bribe came forward with his own testimony in exchange for immunity. The two men who'd staged Jake's robbery were tracked down and arrested. Jake Morrison's conviction was overturned. After 6 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit, he was released. I met him outside the prison gates with Maria, and we both cried. He was thinner than I remembered, older, harder, but he was free. I'm sorry, I told him through my tears. I'm so sorry I didn't believe you. I should have fought harder for you back then. Jake shook his head. You were a kid, Rachel. We both were. You didn't know what Dennis was capable of, but you figured it out eventually. And you stopped him. That's what matters. The medical board investigated my case. Because I'd never actually stolen any patient files and had only pretended to cooperate in order to expose Dennis, they decided not to revoke my license. But I resigned from Premier Physical Therapy anyway. Working there would always remind me of Dennis's manipulation. I needed a fresh start. Mark called me on a Tuesday evening, 4 weeks after Dennis's arrest. Can we talk? In person, we met at a coffee shop, the same one where I'd met with Maria that first time. Mark looked tired, like he hadn't been sleeping well. I probably looked the same. I've been seeing a therapist, Mark said without preamble, trying to work through everything. And I've realized something. My dad manipulated the circumstances of us meeting, but he didn't create what we built together. Every date, every conversation, every moment we shared, that was us. That was real. I think so too, I said quietly. But I also realized that you didn't trust me enough to come to me when you were in trouble, Mark continued. You thought I'd choose my father over you, and I need to understand why. What did I do that made you think I wouldn't believe you? I thought about that carefully. It wasn't anything you did, I admitted. It was my own fear. I grew up watching my parents turn on each other. I learned that family bonds break when things get hard. I never fully believed that your loyalty to me would outweigh your loyalty to him. That's what we need to work on, Mark said. If we're going to stay married, we need to trust each other completely. No more secrets, no more fears that the other person will abandon us when things get tough. Do you want to stay married? I asked, afraid of the answer. Mark reached across the table and took my hand. I love you, Rachel. I've loved you since our first date. My father may have orchestrated us meeting, but he didn't create my feelings. He didn't make me propose to you. He didn't force me to stand at that altar and promise to love you forever. That was all me, and it's still all me. I started crying then, relief flooding through me. I love you too, so much, and I'm sorry I didn't come to you sooner. I'm sorry I let fear control me. We'll work on it, Mark promised. Together. Dennis Bennett was convicted on multiple counts of blackmail, extortion, bribery, and conspiracy. He was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison. His company collapsed, sold off piece by piece to pay legal fees and settlement claims. Patricia divorced him and moved across the country to live with her sister. Jake Morrison received a substantial settlement from the state for wrongful conviction. He used the money to go back to school, studying criminal justice. I want to help other people who get railroaded by the system, he told me when we had lunch together 6 months after his release. I want to make sure what happened to me doesn't happen to others. Maria was promoted at her law firm, specializing in wrongful conviction cases. She became a voice for the falsely accused, using everything she'd learned to help overturn unjust verdicts. Mark and I went to couples therapy for 6 months. It was hard work, learning to trust each other completely, to communicate without fear, to build a marriage based on honesty instead of the illusion his father had tried to create. But we did it. We found our way back to each other, stronger than before. I opened my own physical therapy practice, small and independent. No corporate ties, no opportunities for manipulation, just me, my patients, and the honest work of helping people heal. On the anniversary of Dennis's arrest, Mark and I visited the coffee shop where we'd had our crucial conversation. We ordered drinks and sat in the same booth, holding hands across the table. You know what I've learned? Mark said thoughtfully. Evil thrives when good people stay silent. My father got away with his crimes for years because people were too afraid to speak up. You stopped him because you refused to stay silent. Maria stopped him, I corrected. And Jake's courage to maintain his innocence even when everyone thought he was guilty. And you for believing me even when it meant accepting horrible truths about your father. We all stopped him, Mark agreed. Together. I thought about everything that had happened, the betrayal, the fear, the desperate plan to expose Dennis, the painful aftermath. It had nearly destroyed my marriage, my career, my entire life. But it had also shown me that I was stronger than I knew, that standing up to evil, even when the cost seemed unbearable, was always the right choice. What are you thinking about? Mark asked, squeezing my hand. I'm thinking that your father tried to turn me into a criminal to save himself, I said. But instead, I became the person who brought him to justice. He underestimated me because he thought fear would control me. He forgot that sometimes when you push someone hard enough, they push back. Mark smiled, and it was the first real smile I'd seen from him in weeks. Remind me never to underestimate you. Deal, I said, smiling back. We finished our coffee and walked out into the sunshine together. The past year had been a nightmare, but it had taught me invaluable lessons about trust, courage, and the importance of standing up for what's right even when the personal cost is high. Dennis Bennett had tried to make me a pawn in his corrupt empire. Instead, I became the catalyst for his downfall. And in the process, I discovered that the power to change your circumstances lies not in silence and submission, but in speaking truth and refusing to be controlled by fear. My marriage survived. My conscience remained clear. And somewhere across the city, Jake Morrison was building a new life, free from the prison cell that should never have held him. Justice isn't always swift, and it isn't always easy, but it's always worth fighting for.